Ladies and gentlemen, just how powerful is the PS5 Pro? Obviously, we are waiting for an official announcement from Sony, which is expected to take place later this month. And I, for one, am going to be absolutely fascinated to see what Sony actually announces, not just in terms of the specifications of the console, but which titles we're expecting to see enhanced for the PS5 Pro that have already been released, upcoming games that are going to be heavily marketed to utilizing the PS5 Pro, but also what the pricing strategy will be. But anyway, there are of course a lot of questions exactly how capable the new machine will be. And there is a recent post on Twitter from Kepler-L2. Now, full disclosure, I actually saw this yesterday, but I waited until today because I decided to, well, kind of just ask a few sources on their opinion. So Kepler-L2 is a very well-known leaker and actually has leaked numerous aspects of the PS5 Pro before, including some of the GPU configuration. But basically they state that they believe that the 7700 XT is going to be a pretty good one-for-one comparison with the PS5 Pro's GPU in rasterization performance. In ray tracing though, it is going to be significantly better. Now, the 7700 XT is basically using the RDNA free architecture when it comes to the PC. The PS5 Pro though isn't quite as simple. It is using a custom GPU architecture that kind of uses RDNA 3.5, which is going to be heavily featured in the upcoming Strix Point Halo APUs known as Sarlacc. But there are also Strix Point GPUs that have, APUs that are already available on the PC, and they are pretty damn performant. However, the RT elements of the PS5 Pro seem to be using RDNA 4, and we can pretty much say that this is the case because of also documentation that has leaked from Sony and Eurogamer and others have been posting about this. And of course, the PS5 Pro's GPU is going to be much better than the PS5 base model, not only because of the later IP in terms of RDNA 4, but it just simply has more resources. I.e., there's more workgroup processors, there's just more stuff on the GPU that can handle ray tracing. There are also a plethora of enhancements thanks to the later architecture for things like the cache, and I've discussed this recently in another video, why Unreal Engine 5 is going to perform so much better on the PS5 Pro. So as I mentioned, I did want to speak to a few developers. Now, I want to make it very clear that when it comes to game performance across different architectures, it's not just a case of, well, this game will scale perfectly, therefore all other games will work exactly the same. Different architectures push the machine in different ways, and you can see this yourself. Like, look at reviews of graphics cards on the PC, and you're just going to see that some games perform better on this GPU architecture, for example, an RTX 40 card versus an AMD card, and I am simplifying things just for the sake of the video. However, I have spoken to a few different people, and obviously I can't give details where they work, but let's just say that they have pretty detailed knowledge of the console. That's one of the reasons I was able to leak so much of the PS5 Pro stuff, well, kind of early. And according to one of the folks, they said that it could be up to around the 7800 XT, whereas the ray tracing performance is thought to be better. Now, meanwhile, another source said it's going to fall between the two. So it's probably going to be a little bit less than 7800, but at the same time, it's probably going to be, again, a little better than the 7700. However, that is going to, once again, be dependent very much on the game which is running, but ray tracing is much better on the PS5 Pro versus the base model machine. However, just about everyone I have spoken to, and this is obviously a very good thing, are very, very, very confident in PlayStation's upscaling technology. And of course, we've discussed this at length before, so I won't go over the details again, but essentially it's working very similar to NVIDIA's DLSS, or Deep Learning Super Sampling. And I think that this is going to be one of those technologies that, just like DLSS, is going to continue to evolve. And from what I've understood from developer documentation, this is the case. Sony are definitely in this for the long haul. It's going to be absolutely fascinating to see what differences Sony incorporate versus, let's say, DLSS or FSR, because obviously there are so many different technologies. It's also going to be very intriguing to see whether Sony really push frame generation technologies. FSR on the PC as well as console typically works better at kind of a higher frame rate, for example 60 FPS, You can kind of look at developer documentation from AMD themselves, and they'll say that a good base frame rate is around 60 FPS. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Sony differentiates itself. There are also, and I covered this quite some time ago, some very interesting presentations from Sony themselves in regards to ray tracing reconstruction and basically denoising technologies. Some of this was really being pushed for movies, but we can obviously see PlayStation logos being placed there. So I think it's a pretty good indicator that Sony are going to be really doubling down on ray tracing, and obviously, again, the PS5 Pro is an absolute beast when it comes to ray tracing performance. It's certainly not going to outperform, flagship PC GPUs, so obviously there is that to take into account. However, I do think the machine is going to be really pretty impressive. It's going to be very interesting though, because at this point, developers are only really starting to get kind of like used to the machine. Now, obviously, there are some dials that they can quite easily turn up. I'm simplifying things, of course, but resolution, that type of thing, it's not that difficult to just start cranking up the minimum, resolution values of games and kind of do some other basic enhancements here or there. But it will, of course, take time for developers to really get a handle on what the console is capable of. Therefore, we don't truly know what the capabilities of the machine is. Now, it is worth noting that it is not a PS6. So, many of the underlying key technologies of the PS5 are basically there. They're just enhanced. The CPU, for example, is very similar. It's still using Zen 2 as a base. So, it's not going to be a completely next generation experience. It's going to be kind of similar to what we saw with the PS4 to PS4 Pro. Arguably, I'd probably say this might be a bit of a bigger jump, simply because there are so many improvements in ray tracing, plus obviously this new upscaling technology does sound pretty impressive. I will be very interested to see how the PS5 Pro actually performs in the marketplace. It's obviously going to be very price sensitive. With that said, like I've said, on Twitter a couple of times, it's like, there's always this question of like, why are Sony releasing the PS5 Pro? Why would you buy a PS5 Pro? And it's like, well, if you're kind of involved in the Sony ecosystem and you've got the cash, it just is a very logical purchase to me. Now, obviously, if you're someone who just plays the odd PlayStation exclusive here or there, and you don't really care that much, you just, it's like, oh, well, Wolverine, I'm just going to grab it. Then obviously you may not be super enthralled to kind of like, cough up for the new machine. But if you're really like kind of invested and the PlayStation is your primary gaming system or what have you, as well as having a TV which is actually really going to be capable of kind of displaying this, because obviously you're going to want like a 4K HDR screen, ideally VRR, 120 Hertz or better, for your display, then I think it's going to be a pretty good upgrade. With that said, guys, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.